us, but we encourage you to raise questions in the chat box, which will all be answered in the second half of this seminar. Yeah, so let's begin. First of all, thank you, Andrew, for being here with us. And let's just start off with some background questions. So where did you go to school? Where did you go to high school? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Toronto, Richmond Hill, and I've been here. I basically spent my high school up until high school career here. I went to Thornley Secondary School, so that's like Bayview and John for those who are local to the area. And in high school, basically Thornley is it's a French immersion school. So if you want, you can actually ask me questions in French as well. I did 12 years of French immersion. And yeah, after that, I went to Waterloo. So from here, I moved an hour and a half west to Waterloo, and then moved a little further west to California afterwards. And that's basically my my geographical story in a nutshell.
Okay, so that sounds pretty interesting. How was your high school experience? I mean, being like a software engineer and who graduated like just out of a normal high school. Yeah, how was that?
High school for me was an interesting ride because for the first 3 years of high school, I actually didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to play the oboe in an orchestra, and I wanted to teach oboe on the side. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you guys didn't know what an oboe was. That's how popular the instrument kind of is. That sort of is akin to the way I grew up. I grew up playing I grew up playing the violin, and then I played the oboe. And I was eventually going to transition that into a career in music. And so that's what I did for the first 3 years of my high school. Worked on that. And in grade 12, I guess a switch kind of flipped, I guess. And all of a sudden, I found code interesting. I started a high school club for so basically my sort of local chapter of a computing club where we basically went over topics. I taught younger grades tutorials on how to do things in Python, just little basic stuff. Basic extracurricular stuff for the younger years. And then I also ran the CCC, the Canadian Computing Competition for my school's local chapter. And so that involves like corresponding with the school, going back and forth, organizing tests, collecting payments, stuff like that. And interestingly, that like transition from like wanting to be a musician, my grades weren't the best, from that to like, oh, I suddenly want to fully nerd out in computing like that. I still can't explain to this day why that happened. I just saw an interest and I went with it basically. And it seemed to have worked out because I got into Waterloo. But it was an interesting ride at the time. I will say that.
Okay, yeah, this certainly sounds like an interesting ride. As a grade 12 student who just decided to go for software engineering in grade 12, what courses did you take that led you to today?
Yeah, let's see here. So in my first semester, I took AP English, I took advanced functions, and I took physics. The reason I took AP English was because I knew the teacher, and the teacher, me and the teacher had basically a rapport. I basically reached out to him before for like a book recommendation or two, and I knew that I would be able to get a decent mark if I went with him, and I'd also be able to learn a decent amount. And he was the one that actually recommended a certain book that I'll be talking about later. I am not affiliated with that book. The book is over 100 years old, but since he recommended that book to me, I was actually able to like improve my AAF, improve my English, improve my communication, and eventually write my AAF, which is basically Waterloo's text-based applicant form. I was eventually able to write my AIF and get in. But to step back there, I took AP English, I took advanced functions, and I took physics. Now, advanced functions and physics, those are actually pretty tricky courses in my opinion. And the reason that I did well eventually in them is because I figured out like how to learn. I learned how to learn basically, right? And I learned how I like to learn. The traditional approach to learning something is staring at the problem and drilling over and over and over and over and over and over again until something clicks, right? Turns out that if you do something over and over again and expect a different result, you get what Einstein will define as insanity. So instead, I figured out that I like to draw diagrams and I like to argue my way through problems. Meaning, if I were to like come to a different answer as somebody, if I were to like, solve through a physics problem and do something wrong, and my friend would do something different, I would then go back and forth with him. We take it up on the whiteboard and we discuss. We would basically justify. We would justify our answers, and that's actually how I learn now. I learn by asking a bunch of questions, no matter how stupid, questions they are. Like I learned by basically inquiring and arguing with somebody over and over again. I also learned by doing diagrams. And so figuring out that click in my head, figuring out how I like to learn actually provided to be pretty beneficial in advanced functions and physics, especially technical courses. And I ended up with like a 96 in advanced functions, I think, and like a 90 in physics. So I was quite happy with that because up until that like first semester in grade 12, my grades were like 75, maybe 80, right? Sometimes my math would be like low 80s and my music would always be like 99, right? But that's music. So that's not like, you don't need a music mark to get into Waterloo engineering, right? But all of a sudden this switch kind of flicked and I knew suddenly now how I want to learn, right? And because of that, I was pretty well rewarded, right? And one sort of pro tip I want to leave away with this is that like, if you want to if you want to be effective in your classes, you first need to learn how to learn, right? And you first need to know how to ask the right questions. And then you need to question everything you don't understand, right? Having experience now in like teaching people, I now recognize how important it is to understand the problem first, right? And with the problem, then you can ask the right questions, right? So all this to say that basically like you have to find that switch, right? You have to find that thing that works for you, and then you got to roll with it. So yeah, basically that's the gist of my first semester. During that time, though, I made my application I applied to, let's see here, Waterloo, U of T, Queens, McMaster, UBC. I applied to Ryerson, Laurier, basically every single school I could think of that has an engineering program and a CS, like a computer science and like sort of a nerdy program, right? And I just basically went gung-ho and applied to all of them. I spent $500, $50 per application to get my name out there and hope that one engineering school will take me. Yeah, so that's the gist of my sort of my first semester in grade 12.
Okay. So just as a follow-up, how was your second semester? What courses did you take? Yeah, was it any better than the first semester?
Yeah, it was really, my second semester was a lot better actually, because during that time, I had actually gotten early acceptance to Waterloo. So I got in Waterloo in February, basically, right? Late February, right when the CCC was actually being written, fun fact. And that actually did a lot for my mental health because my first semester, I was like super stressed. I even took, I don't even remember what course. I actually had 4 courses originally and I dropped one. I took a spare instead because of how like stressed I was getting and how worked up I was getting. I was getting like acne all over my face and like every waking moment was just spent like stressing about like making sure I get a conceptual understanding, making sure my diagrams are right, like just really head down, do the work sort of thing. And then after I got in, I realized how in the zone I had gotten, and I sort of took a step back. I took chemistry, calculus, and then I took French. And at that point, I was hitting senioritis. You know, after you get into your school, you can hit senioritis where your grades don't really matter as much because you got your letter. You just need to maintain an 85. So at that point, it was actually almost mathematically impossible for me to fail. So I took a nice time to sort of step back and relax and work on my side projects actually, and figure out like what I wanted to build, right? And then actually start building a project of my own, which I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do if I were still stressed, you know. So yeah, that was basically my grade 12 second semester. It was a lot lighter because I had gotten in, and I am forever very grateful for the admissions officer that let me in because like I know nowadays it's really, really a lot more competitive. I did the process 4.5 years ago, right? And even in those 4 years, it's gotten exponentially harder. I guess that's my story. Basically, it seemed to have worked out, and my grade 12 second semester was a lot lighter than my first semester. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Even as a grade 11 student, like who's only in grade 11, but yeah, I can sort of relate to you in the sense of the stress and like all the pressure. You mentioned side projects. What were those, if you don't mind telling us?
I got you. So at a high level, right? Side projects are basically projects that you start on your own, right? The advice that I give out for like, what do I do for my project is find something you enjoy doing, right? Say League of Legends. right? A lot of you guys play League of Legends. Let's be honest. I played a lot of League of Legends, right? Okay, one example for League of Legends, just sort of off the top of my head, would be like an application that tracks player statistics in a database and then like graphs your player stats over time, as an example, right? So my side project, it was a little dumber, but basically you hold your phone and you do a dab and it counts your calories. Because at the time I was kind of into fitness as well. So literally it was like an exercise. Basically, it was an exercise calorie calculator. Something as bare bones and as just kind of, I guess I can say, sort of flat out stupid app, right? The point is, though, that I was able to complete the app and I was able to polish it to the point where I can publish it on the App Store, right? Now, how many grade 12 students can say they publish an app on the App Store, right? So I was extremely fortunate to have the time to be able to do that, right? And obviously, I capitalize on the hand I've been given, right? And so, to give more background on the project itself, though, it was an Android app because I had known Java from high school. I built an Android app with Android Studio. I basically just drew some stick men, and then from there, I would basically borrow basically simple implementations that I saw online, and I would adapt the code such that it fits my use case, right? For example, finite state machines or accelerometers. I'm getting a little too deep in the technicals here, but basically being able to take like this vision, right? I want to build an app where you do a dab and you count your calories, take this vision and like convert it into something that's actually like not tangible, something that's actually usable, right? That's the skill that I really picked up actually in high school and in first year as well. I guess we can go a little bit more about that later, but I guess, yeah, that's sort of what I did for a side project.
Okay. Yeah. In addition, as a high school student who got into the University of Waterloo and now ended up in Silicon Valley, I'm sure many people are interested in your grades. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, how were your grades in grade 12 or just high school in general? Well, you mentioned earlier, but yeah, grade 12, how were they?
So again, 9 to 11, my grades were not the best. 75 average at maybe 80, right? They weren't stellar. I was maybe average, right? And then my average getting into Waterloo was a little bit above 95. On top of that, right? So I had the 95, which was in my like, wait, that's 20% better than anything I've ever gotten, right? Like I was hitting 75s, now I'm hitting 95s, right? And then on top of that, I on my application form, I had a whole lot of extracurriculars, right? I had competed nationally in oboe. So I competed in the Canadian music competition numerous times, and I had won scholarships numerous times. I had over like $5,000-6,000 in scholarships as well, right? Just from my music, actually, in fact. And then on top of that, I knew how to make oboe reeds. So I would like manufacture oboe reeds and sell them. I had basically a whole bunch of other stuff around my application that wasn't just my grades, right? I could talk about how I started a computing club. I literally like from nothing. I took a bunch of nerds. Everyone played League of Legends and everyone was into programming at the time in grade 12. And I decided to start a club. And then, let's get together and sort of, I guess, shoot the shit, I guess, be casual with the way we do our code, the way we share our implementations, the way we talk about code and new things in tech. And eventually that actually grew into a thing that, fun fact, still exists today. I managed to get in touch with a student that graduated last year. And he says, yeah, the club is still going. It's alive. So I'm glad to see that my club is still, it's still kicking. But that to say that it's not just about grades, right? With that 95, chances are, I think there's like a 50% chance you'll get in with a 95. But then after that, like to make that 55, to make that 50% like a 90%, you got to do all this other stuff around that, right? Like I had RCM in oboe. I had French immersion under my belt. I had like a decent amount of community hours, right? I volunteered at the local tennis club, all these things all over the place, right? To sort of boost my application. So to finalize though, yeah, I had a 95 going in. That was the golden number basically that everyone asked for. It was like a 95.2 or a 95.4 or something like that. And after that in grade 12, I finished with like a 92 because I didn't like, I had hit senioritis at that point and I just needed an 85 to secure my spot at Waterloo. So I didn't gun it afterwards. I kept it at the 90s basically. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And when you were getting into Waterloo, what did you need to prepare? Like you mentioned early on how you had to do the AIF.
Yes.
And so what did you need to prepare?
Okay, so for the AIF, there will be a bunch of questions, obviously, and you have a limit to how many characters you can have in each box, in each response, right? So they'll ask a question like, what are your interests in Waterloo and why do you apply to this program? Very fair question, right? They even asked me like what book I read, right? What books or short stories have you read, and explain the premise of the book, right? All these to basically differentiate or to separate you as a person and your writing style from other people's writing style. And that's why at the beginning, I actually recommended this book, which influences writing style, right? So other things you need to prepare, besides answering those questions and like reviewing those questions. If you are currently in like grades 9 to 11, what I'd recommend you guys do is actually make a spreadsheet. So I had a little Google spreadsheet where I kept track of all the different extracurriculars I did. So whether that be accounting club, I did accounting club one year just for fun. Accounting club, badminton, right? I was on a ski team. I raced. I used to ski race, right? So I would write down all the commitments I had. I did tennis, right? And then I would write how many hours I commit. And then I would put a little description, how many times a week I did it, right? And Waterloo actually makes you input a table of all the different extracurriculars you've done. So I recommend having that information ready to go. And on top of that, making that spreadsheet now actually helps you later, because now you know the format in which you need to like remember things and in which you need to describe things. So it's actually very beneficial right now, today. Something you can do is actually just make a spreadsheet and just track all the different extracurriculars you've done over the past year or two. If you're in like grades 9 to 11, obviously, if you're in grade 12, you can still do the same thing. You can make a spreadsheet for yourself. They'll ask about that. They'll also ask about awards and like certifications and certificates. So for me, I had one like the music award in high school, little things, right? I had one like the CS award. I had like many national music competition wins under my belt. So I put that down, right? What else did they ask for? Nowadays, what they'll do is they'll ask for a video interview as well. It's a 1v0 video interview. Basically, it's a piece of software that you download, and it'll come up with a prompt, and then it'll record your response to the prompt. A little, so they want to see how you talk as well, rather than just write and read. They want to see how you talk. And advice for that. What advice do I have for that? Speak clearly and justify your answers. Even if you're wrong, admit that you're wrong. Okay. So they're going to ask you a very open-ended question, like how many, let's say I have a deserted island with 100 people and I have a lifeboat that fits 10, right? How do I prioritize these 100 people such that I get the people off the island in the most efficient manner, or in the best manner, or in the manner that offends the least amount of people? Well, and then you start your response. Well, I would prioritize people that are hurt, would go first, children, whatever, right? Don't be afraid to say, oh, I realize that this answer actually may not be right in the circumstance. I actually now know that this is the right answer, right? I should now prioritize babies instead of whatever, right? It's okay to go back on your answer as long as you justify it. Justify everything, though. I did this because that. I order it like this because that. Okay, and don't do run-on sentences. Don't go on and on and on and on. I have a habit of doing that, and so I try to catch myself doing that. Don't go on and on about like one thing, right? Always be progressive in the development of your ideas. Don't fidget as well. I'm very guilty of doing this. Whenever I'm talking, I'll fidget back and forth, and I'll twiddle my thumbs and do this. They can see everything, right? So anything on that screen is fair game. I had a friend who literally like took his Rubik's Cube and started solving his Rubik's Cube like in the middle of the video interview. He got into U of T. He got into NSI U of T. But like, that's usually, you don't want to be fiddling. You want to be confident, direct, and you want to be able to justify everything you say. So those are some tips I guess I have for figuring out how to get into Waterloo through the AIF and using all these other magical extracurricular stuff that everybody has that's a little different. I have a little more pieces of advice towards the end for like how you can gear your AIF and gear your application better for better reading. We can go into that a little later. But yeah, that's my sort of gist on AIF writing and application writing.
Okay, sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about your life at University of Waterloo. So how was your move there?
So my move was interesting. The first couple of months I really missed home. I got homesick because I spent 18 years at home, right? And then now all of a sudden I'm out. But I had a great group of friends around me. We would we would all work together. We all came down to the lobby and we would work together and argue with these problems. And everyone was very helpful to me. And we all helped each other with our resumes and find jobs and stuff like that. There's actually a great community there, especially if you're in a CS program. Like, people will help other people, and especially engineers. Engineers will always help other engineers. We don't screw each other over. Okay. Like, if you take AFM or some other programs, like, people will actually fight each other, not literally fight each other, but they'll do things that aren't necessarily good practices in creating a good community. But engineers generally are good for that. I was actually really pleased to see that there were a lot of resources available for like adjustment to university life. And I took full advantage of our resident, Dawn, which is basically the person that lives on your floor that's an upper year. They're a great resource to ask questions, to run mock interviews, to basically just help with your adjustment. So I was very glad to have that. And so my move-in was generally positive, although I did miss home quite a bit to start. Eventually, you grow to get used to it, though.
Okay. And I assume most of our audience are like middle school or high school, around that age range. So for them, what would you say surprised you or shocked you the most when you started university?
It's very hard to live. Very, very hard to live. By that, what I mean is sustain yourself in a manner that's not like unhealthy to you, basically. I ate spaghetti for like 6 days a week for like 4 months straight. It was bad. All right. Because listen, I was used to mom's cooking. My mother's the best cook in the world, right? She cooks all the food and she's amazing, right? Problem is, when I move out of home, I don't get that cooking, right? I don't get the laundry, I don't get the cooking. So I need to figure out how to live. And then on top of that, I need to pass all my courses. And on top of that, I need to find a job, a co-op, right? And then on top of that, I need to find friends. And then on top of that, and it just keeps building and building and building, right? So what shocked me was I was ready for the school shock. I was ready for, oh my goodness, this is going to be a lot harder than before. I was ready for my grades to drop from high school 95 to university 65 or 75. I was ready for that. What shocked me the most was actually the adjustment, everything around my academics, right? So that's my personal health, my mental health, my like literally my like eating habits, right? I put on like 15 pounds, like 15, 20 pounds, right? I had another chin, like it was bad. So that really shocked me, how to basically sustain yourself out of home, right? I had picked a dorm style where I have to cook for myself. So I learned how to cook for myself, a few very, very easy meals, right? And then eventually with your roommates, you struggle together, right? None of my roommates knew how to cook. So eventually we just put some stuff together, made some fried rice. And then eventually fried rice becomes, I don't know, something else, an omelet, right? And it just keeps going and going. But what shocked me the most when I started was actually the everything else around academics, basically, how to adjust to that, living on your own, truly alone, right? With people your age, not parents for the first time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I get that, because like you're away from family, away from friends, and like it's new environment, so you got to readapt. So you mentioned your co-op. What was your first co-op, and what was that like?
Yeah, my first co-op was first to find the first co-op was one hell of a struggle. I had gone in with like one project on my resume and one hackathon on my resume. And even with like a project and a hackathon, I still went deep into continuous round, meaning I was nearing exam season when I was still interviewing. Usually you find your job halfway through the semester. I found my job almost at the end of the semester. I was interviewing and interviewing and interviewing on and on and on. I had like 150 applications, which turned into 10 interviews, which eventually turned to one job offer. And when I finally got that one job offer, I was so happy. It paid $18 an hour, but I didn't care. I was crying. I was so happy, right? Because it was hard. It's very hard to find a first co-op, right? Because experience breeds experience, right? But I ended up working at TrustWave, which is a sort of smaller network security company based in Chicago, but they had an office in Waterloo, which basically took me on, and I worked in Waterloo for my first co-op. And interesting things that I learned there was like, I used to think that going into an office and like seeing professionals at work, that people know what they're doing, but it turns out that like very few people actually know what they're doing. And it is totally fine to ask dumb and silly questions, because chances are they're just as curious, right? That's one thing that I picked up from my first experience. I used to think, oh my goodness, I'm working with adults. My boss had kids that were my age, right? That's the age difference. That could have been like my dad, right? As my boss. It's a very different dynamic when you're actually working with people that are at that age, right? And figuring out how to talk to those guys, right? Figuring out how to relate to them. It's very hard to relate to them, right? And then learning that not everybody knows all the answers, right? And being able to go back and forth with somebody is actually a neat way to find the right answer, or at least find an answer that satisfies the most amount of what are those called, of stakeholders, basically. Yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of the gist of my first co-op. Finding my first co-op was an interesting one, but after that, after you find your first one, honestly, the rest is just easy peasy. It's after that, I worked at like OpenText and then Oanda. We'll go deeper into these experiences later, but like after you get that first co-op on your resume, the ball just keeps going and going and going, right? And it's a lot easier to find jobs, to find interviews, first of all, and then to find jobs, right? A lot of it is a confidence boost. Oh, now I have one, so now I can be better, right? Another one would be like just straight up the experience boost, right? Like being able to put an actual work experience down means somebody took the chance to hire you, right? Somebody else took the risk to hire you, and they thought well of you because they gave you a good review, and then you wrote relevant points on your resume, right? So after getting your first, you're basically good to go. And then you focus on getting good co-ops rather than just getting a co-op, right? And we'll go into that, I guess, next.
Okay, yeah. So that was going to be my next. That was going to be my next question. You said first co-op, so that implies that you've done more co-ops. So What co-ops have you done?
Yeah, I've done 6 co-ops. Waterloo Engineering makes you do 5 out of 6. So everybody does 6 out of 6 because we want the money, we want the experience, right? So I did 6. I worked at TrustWave in Waterloo first, and then I worked at OpenText in Richmond Hill. So I stayed at home. I wrote some enterprise Java. I worked on an enterprise Java application in OpenText, and that was interesting because like that was my first like actual corporate environment where like I actually had to wear not just shorts and a t-shirt. I actually had to wear like nice pants, not a dress shirt, but like I wear a collared shirt. So for developers, wearing a collared shirt is like unheard of, or almost unheard of, especially for developers in the Valley. If you show up to a job in the Valley and you're wearing a collared shirt, people will look at you kind of funny. Like I wear shorts to work, right? Everybody, even my senior vice president wears shorts to work, right? Like that's how we do it in tech. But OpenText was it's an old school, very corporate environment, right? So they but I don't want to talk about the dress code. OpenText. After that, I worked at Oanda, which is a foreign currency exchange trading platform. Basically, you input your Canadian dollars, and then you bet on if Canadian will go up with respect to USD, with respect to all these different currencies. I built trading platform applications for them. After that, I worked at Reuters. The news guys, Reuters. I worked at Thomson Reuters. I built basically public cloud network infrastructure for those guys. An interesting implementation of Kubernetes called a service mesh, but let's not get into that. If you want to talk tech, we can talk tech. But basically, I worked on network infrastructure for those guys, Thomson Reuters. And then after that, I found my job, my full-time job at Arista Networks as I found it was a co-op at the time, but Arista Networks is located in Santa Clara, California, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. And after that, I just basically kept returning to I just kept returning to Arista, and it worked out because they gave me a full-time offer. One thing to note is that I actually managed to get another offer for a company in Norway called Cognite during my 5th co-op round. And I unfortunately didn't get to go to Norway because the visa wouldn't be done on time. So I ended up, instead of Norway, I picked California, and then COVID hit, so I couldn't go back to Norway. And I just kept going back to Arista, and eventually, the rest is history. I eventually found my co-op in the Valley, as everybody raves and dreams of, right? But the progression can be pretty tricky, and I guess we can go into that later. So that's basically the progression of my types of co-ops. I have network security experience. I worked in enterprise Java applications. I built trading platform applications. I built network infrastructure tools. And now I'm building network switch manufacturing tracking tools, basically. So that's basically the progression of my co-ops.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Yeah, it really shows like the development of yourself as a person, as an engineer as well. So would you say that the co-ops and the jobs you've done in Silicon Valley are challenging? Since like I know most people, they want to, like, it's a dream of theirs to go to Silicon Valley and work there and like earn money, I guess. But would you say the work done there is challenging? Or for you, at least?
The work is just as challenging as the work here, honestly. The only difference is location and also the environment, right? Most big companies will have corporate most big tech companies will have corporate headquarters in the Valley or in America, right? And then they'll have satellite offices in Vancouver and Toronto, right? Um, and the quality of engineers that you get in the Valley are literally the same as the quality of engineers you get here. The difference is it costs a lot more to live there and they pay a lot more. That's the Silicon Valley. That's the American way of life, basically, right? If you want to go deep on the politics for why they pay a lot more than Canadians pay, we can go into that. But the difference in skill level, honestly, I felt the jobs were pretty fair, right? I was challenged but never overwhelmed, basically, in all of my jobs. So I can't really say that there was a big difference. But I also became a better engineer, right? As I go through these experiences, I learned how to look for things. I learned how to Google, right? I learned how to actually write code in a style that that other people can actually read, right? That's why I put a lot of emphasis on readability. But yeah, to answer your question, the difference, not much a difference in quality of engineers, but I will say the differences will show in the people you meet. Americans, working with Americans is a lot more, they get a lot more heated in meetings, and they're also very different when they talk. Everyone's very talkative in the States. In the office, like banter is a lot more common, right? Little cultural stuff like that. That's basically it, though, honestly. Like, yeah, the work was pretty similar.
Okay. So how often as a software engineer do you get to like collaborate and communicate with others? Because most people, when they think of software engineers, they just think of a guy who's hunched over a computer typing away and like not
Yeah.
talking to anyone. Yeah. So how often do you get to collaborate with others?
Every single day, actually. Every single day. I do this thing where since I'm sort of a newbie in the Valley, right? I literally have like less than a year of experience, right? I have a daily meeting every single day where for 15 minutes, I have the floor and I can ask questions. I can figure out what's blocking me, right? And then we can go back and forth. And if we need more design meetings, we can go into a design meeting, right? I actually have engineers that are willing to work closely one-to-one with me for a very short period of time, just in the morning, right? And this basically allows this allows other engineers in your circle on your team to actually learn what everyone else is up to as well, right? Some may know this as a Scrum meeting, but we do a sort of a modified Scrum stand-up meeting where I also ask questions about what's going on here, how to get myself up to speed with all the different stacks that we use. To answer your question, every day I go back and forth with my engineers, and every day we're arguing back and forth, arguing in good spirit though, right? It's not toxic in that regard, right? Everyone's productive, some name calling, but for the most part, it's productive. Sorry. Yeah, every day.
Okay. Yeah, looking back, what would you have done differently or done the same in high school? I mean, since you've gone through all this entire process and you obviously like had a lot of diversions or like in the path. So
Yeah.
what would you have done differently or the same, to be honest?
What would I have done differently? That's a good one. What would I have done differently? I would have gotten more of my friends involved, I think. I had a lot of friends that were like interested in it, but at the time I didn't have as much passion as I do now about like tech and code and this world that I live in now, right? At the time, it was just sort of, oh, here's something that can make me money and I'm very good at, right? But I wish that I had picked up on, oh, this is actually a very cool thing that I can build with code, right? Like on my own time, I take notes and I learn on my own for how like different technologies work. I literally just like read a book on like blockchain, right? It's not relevant to my work, but I'm just like discovering these cool tech things, right? Maybe I can build something with blockchain. I don't know, right? But something I would do differently in high school is get my other friends involved and sort of preach the good word, I guess, for lack of a better term, preach the good word for how tech can be used, right? Because if I had done so, I have a feeling that a lot of my friends would actually still be, or they would be developers as well, rather than convert to, I don't know, business or other fields, right? A lot of my friends like were down to write code. They took CS courses with me, but at the end, they didn't see, I guess they didn't see what I saw, right? And they ended up picking things that were more interesting to them. But I would have liked to have more of my friends that took tech, right? Out of all my friends in high school, I'm the only one that works in tech. And like, although I make a lot of friends now in my workplace, or I make a lot of friends in the Valley, it's very one dimensional. Everyone talks about the same thing, right? It's just a big, like, everyone makes a lot of money, a lot of money, a lot. It's actually ridiculous how much money they make, like way more than I do. Like, whew, it's actually silly. Everyone's in the same boat, right? Early to mid 20s, like basically 80% dudes, usually an Asian or an Indian dude, right? And we all talk about the same things. We all play games, right? You don't get the diversity as you do in high school. So I wish I had brought a little more different perspectives into tech. Basically, that's what I wish I would have done differently.
Okay. Just another question. So yeah, this is a question I just thought up off the top of my head. So how often like do you have to be creative with yourself? Since like most of the time you're doing work for large companies that have like
Yep.
regulations or certain projects that you need to complete. But like how often are you able to like make your own thing in like as a job?
What do you mean by make your own thing? Do you mean like reinvent yourself or build something?
Build something for like a company, for example.
Yeah. My company doesn't build for other companies. I build internal tools, basically, right? But I guess to find an answer to your question here, I do project-based work. So every 2 months, I'd say every 2 months I'd get a new project, and then for those 8 weeks, I would be basically checking in with my manager. I would get a design document, and I would just start implementing. In terms of like creative freedoms, I have free reign over any creative freedom I want, as long as I can justify it, right? I can't just go around implementing spaghetti code willy-nilly if I can't actually justify why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So I do have a lot of creative freedom, and my work is project-based. So like, here's something that you're working on, and then once you've done that, you work on this, and then once you've done your work on that. And obviously there's some ongoing stuff as well, like server maintenance, upkeep. Those take like a few minutes a day. But yeah, I do get to be creative with my job, and I do have a very project-based workspace right now, and I really do enjoy it because it gives you a fresh perspective on like how you can gear your career. If I find a project that's like really neat, I've actually asked for more projects in that domain, because most tech companies have way too many problems that they need to solve, right? And so engineers generally, you get to choose which problems you want to solve. Unless it's crunch time, you get to choose between a few projects that you want to deal with. So for me, I pick projects that are relevant to my career, right? I want to be primarily a backend and infrastructure engineer. However, I do have a little bit of experience in front end, not the best. So I now pick projects that are more relevant to like learning Golang and learning how to like interface front end backends, learning good practices with APIs, little stuff like that, right? Stuff they don't teach you in school, by the way, which I think they should, but they don't.
Okay. Just going back to something else we might have skipped over early on. Could you just tell the audience and like maybe give some advice on your computing competition career and like any advice for people that want to do a competition?
Yeah. So the thing about these competitions is that they're very, very useful for one thing and one thing only, right? They're very useful for generating a score. They generate a score for you, and that score can then be used or not used in your application to Waterloo. That score is then used to judge yourself against others, right? But that's all it is. It's just a score, right? You work your ass off. You grind many hours a day. You put your head down. You do all these practice problems for a score, right? That score is very, very meaningful when it comes to applying to Waterloo. After that, at the door, right? No one's asking me about my CCC score, right? But that time to take to prepare for my CCC score is actually very relevant, because I would, for example, grind lead code questions. Lead code is some website where they ask you very simple technical problems, right? Given an array, find these two indices that match this, right? Little programming problems like that, right? I would do a bunch of those each day in preparation for these tests, and I would actually assign these problems to students as a high school student in my club. Since I ran the club, I got to like say what we were doing in the club, and part of it was actually solving little problems like this, right? And then after that, I would find cool ways to make that problem, ridiculously challenging and frustrate my friends in a fun way. But all this to say that, like, there's two sides to this. There's two sides to this wall, right? First side is, you work so hard for this test score, and then after you read the test score and you submit it, no one cares about the test score, right? Just like how no one cares about my grades after I'm in Waterloo, right? But when I'm doing my grades, it's a lot. There's a lot to learn, right? And then eventually, being able to prove that you can get a 95 in math means that you did the work, right? Means that you did the work before, and then after that, you can take the base that you learned to get that 95 and apply it than in university, and then take, the base of getting a 75 in university and then applying that to your career, right? So
yeah, and it's good experience, right? These competitions.
Yes, of course. It is good experience. And I do encourage people doing it. Obviously, don't bend over backwards to spend all your time on it, because you got to focus on your schools, right? No point if you have a perfect CCC score, but you have like 85 average, right? It's a priority. You have to recognize your priorities here, right? First comes the grades. Well, first comes your mental health, and then the grades, and then everything else below that, right? Like, can't just you can't just go down one alley, right? You have to unfortunately also be able to prove yourself in all the other domains.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned mental health, how did you like manage your own mental health and like stay like mentally healthy and like positive everything?
Yeah. That comes with community, and that comes with friends, actually. Like, I know people that went through Waterloo alone, or very close to alone, right? They were very quiet, stayed in the room all day. And honestly, their experience is very different from mine, from my experience at Waterloo. Honestly, I was able to go out, party, and also do what I wanted to do, right? And that was because I surrounded myself with good people, with people that actually, now, to give you some insight, my friend group now, like, one of them works at Facebook, one of them works at Instagram, one of them works at Uber, one of them works at Shopify. Like, everyone's doing pretty well for themselves now, right? Because we had this community to begin with, right? Because we found each other, to be a good fit, right? And we had this group of 6 people, well, 7, and then one dropped out, but let's not talk about that. We had this group of people that all supported each other, right? Every time we had an exam, I would learn one course, everyone else would learn a different course, and we would teach the content to each other, right? So I was the expert in like circuits, and I would teach circuits to 5 other people. And then my other friend would be like the expert in programming and data structures, and they would teach data structures to all the other people. And then the math guy would teach math to everyone else, right? That's how we did it. And being able to have that community, right? That honestly that keeps you sane, right? Keeps everyone in check and keeps you sane. Going through it alone, I would not recommend, because you very quickly get overwhelmed, and you have no one to reach out to, no one to really talk to, right? Because I know that people don't reach out to their parents when they're struggling academically. That's just the way it works, right? People don't. If I'm dying in math in university, I'm not going to turn to my dad, right? I'm going to turn to my friends who are also going through that struggle. So people going through a common struggle is like honestly, that's the way to do it. If you find people doing a common struggle, right? That's how you create like true bonds. Honestly, I still talk to them like every day. I talk to them. Like, they're great people, and they're all doing very well for themselves. I'm glad that I was a part of their upbringing through Waterloo, and I'm also I know that they're glad to have me through their upbringing as well. So that's one thing that sort of kept me in check and kept me sane through my time in Waterloo. So I guess a word of advice is find good people around you, find a good community, right? Find a little group of people that like you can share everything with, right? We would spend like countless nights staying up doing work. We would be in the lab at 3 or 4 a.m. An assignment is due at 8 a.m. and we still wouldn't be done, but it was still fun because we were all struggling together, right? I mean, we hated it, but also kind of loved it. Stuff like that, right? People to do it with is honestly like way more supportive and way better for your sanity, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that covers about everything. Thank you for taking the time to answer all these questions, Andrew. Of course. Yeah, okay. So now let's open it up to some questions from the audience. I already see a couple. Okay, so someone asked, what AP courses or classes do you recommend, or do you personally think most colleges would be interested in?
English and math, honestly. Not the sciences, but English and math. I also took AP Chem, by the way. I forgot to mention that. But the difference between AP Chem and regular Chem is not worth writing the exam over. Like in my high school experience, AP Chems had like one side of the class, regular Chems had the other side, but they just taught the same content. The only difference was like 2 projects at the end and like a little bit of extra module work. That's it. So Chem, physics, not worth it. But for English and math, honestly, like if you have the English skills, if you're able to like write well, and if you're able to use the sandwich method to write your essays, right, and you can write convincingly, I recommend taking AP English, actually. Although the reason I took it was to get a good teacher, because I knew the teacher would be able to teach me well. and also give me a good mark because of that. I would say prioritize first getting a teacher that you can get a good mark with, and then after that, go AP or no AP. High school is unfortunately a dirty game where you have to pick the right teacher. Even if you answer everything perfectly, if you have a teacher that doesn't like you, you're not going to get all the marks. Unfortunately, that's just like, we can argue the ethics or the nature another time, but that's my experience in high school. Like, I know people that literally would like bargain for marks. I'm guilty of bargaining for marks, where I would go to my teacher and be like, was this really worth -3? Was this -2? Right? Like, everybody plays like that. And it's really unfortunate that it does. And like, the reason for that is actually grade inflation, right? If 5 people in the class are bargaining for marks and like optimizing their teachers to find the right teacher so they can get, an extra 2 or 3%, right? All of a sudden, everyone else's marks are devalued, right? Like, you have to unfortunately play the game. I don't agree with the game. I think it should be completely like, I don't think it's fair, right? But it's a game you have to play, where you take an AB course or a regular course, you take it based on which teacher is teaching and which teacher you can get a better mark with. So I know that's sort of a dirty play for me, but that's what my experience is. And that's what all of my other high school people did. And those who did that were actually rewarded significantly harder than those who didn't. Those who took regular English had a chance of coming with a teacher that was like not the best. They would give you low marks. They wouldn't teach very well, right? They spoke unclearly, and they would grade inconsistently. They wouldn't grade consistently, basically, right? And I knew that, like, okay, if I take AP, I can get this guy, right? I don't know, this guy can teach me better, right? So yeah, that should be the primary decider between like AP or not AP. Or yeah. The other thing I want to bring up is IB, because a lot of you guys are like Bayview kids, right? Or like Richmond Hill High. I don't know if RHHS is as IB, but like a bunch of schools have IB. That doesn't, if you go to Waterloo engineering, IB doesn't really matter. Like, I know people that did IB that failed out. I know people that did AP and then they failed out. I know people that did regular and they failed out. Like, and at the end of the day, we all still started Waterloo. We all got into Waterloo. So, I mean, take that advice as, take it as I say it, I guess, and interpret it however you want. But in my opinion, to get into Waterloo engineering, I don't think you need IB. And I guess, yeah, to answer your question, AP, no AP, that should depend more on what teacher is teaching rather than like what you'll actually pick up from AP English versus not AP English.
Okay. Yeah. And there's also another question saying how did you manage your budget for university, and what is the recommended amount of money you should have during university? So like,
that's entirely dependent. Yeah, financials. And what else should I go into then? Do you have any ideas? Financials. I can talk about like cost of living, right?
Yeah, cost of living, and like how much money you should have on hand when you're in university.
Oh, I see. Okay. So let's start with that number first. Let me take a guess here. Assuming you pay for your tuition before you actually enter the term, right? And you pay for you pay for your rent. Sorry, you basically should have enough for your rent. So rent is probably about 800, maybe 900 a month. Really unfortunate for res, $800 to $900 a month for rent. And then after that, I would spend maybe $600 or $700 a month on either food or transport or any other living expenses, right? And like, I don't really party too often, so my alcohol budget's not very big, right? But just food and life takes a big, it takes a very, very big chunk of your wallet. So I'd say budget budget on the safe side, maybe $1,000 per month for the term, for each month in the term. So you have 4 months, so that's about $4,000. So you work a summer job, you can probably find about $4,000, I think. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable number, because like, honestly, you're going to have late nights where all that's open is takeout and you're not going to want to cook. And so you just have to like do takeout, and takeout costs a lot of money, or you'll have to eat at the cafeteria. And if you don't have a meal plan, that'll cost you like $10, $13 a meal, right? And it adds up and up and up and up. So be ready to like we ate spaghetti 6 days a week because we wanted to be cheap, but in reality, we had the money. I had more than $4,000 going into university. That's not really a secret, right? But the good thing is, after you finish your first semester or second semester, you work co-op, right? And if minimum wage is $15 an hour, you can do the math, right? You can actually pay for like a big chunk of your next term, right? And if you're doing tech, if you're in tech specifically, I know that for me, my salary was like my fourth salary at Thomson Reuters was like $33 an hour, right? With $33 an hour, like that's enough to cover tuition and some food, right? And so eventually, as you work your way through the terms, you actually find that you're able to fund your next term using your last co-op term. And that's what I ended up doing. So after the second co-op, I was fully self-sufficient. I didn't need any extra money. Basically, I was able to live on my own financially. And whatever the situation you have with your parents, if you want to fund your kids' education, like if you do that, that is a very, very large burden off of your kids' shoulders. And I do know people that have gotten full rides, as in like their parents, they're very successful parents, and then they paid for their entire, they paid for their entire time at Waterloo, and they're actually doing pretty, like, honestly, just from the top of my head, they're doing probably better than those who had to pay for themselves, because they had that extra mental capacity. They had that extra real estate in their head to focus more on their school, or to focus more on like getting that next job rather than worrying about finances, right? So like, I know that a lot of students don't have that opportunity. And I will say that students that do have that opportunity, that do have that parent backing them or paying for a big chunk of their school, like you will be at a very significant advantage. You will learn that like there are a lot of students in Waterloo that don't have the privilege of living in Richmond Hill, that don't have the privilege of like their parent makes more than $75,000 a year. They don't have the privilege. They don't have the privilege of their parents even funding their first year, right? You'll learn that. You'll see students that actually really have to struggle for it. And that really puts things into perspective. There were students that literally, if they couldn't find a first job, if they couldn't find their co-op, they would have to fly back home. They couldn't, like, their visa, something about their visa wouldn't work out, and they had to fly back home to like Dubai or something, right? There's real world consequences to this. And like, honestly, that the money factor is, I really hate that it is a factor, right? Because it should be fair, right? Like it should be that every student gets an equal opportunity to prove themselves. And if they manage their money poorly, then, well, that's on you, right? But going into school, you'll already see there's a very big disparity in the students, right? So something to look out for. Not everyone is very privileged, right? And that's a reality check on me especially.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, how did you like manage your money? And just a follow-up question to the previous one, how did you like manage it? Like, did you plan everything out? Like, did you have like a spreadsheet or something?
I basically did mass budget strategy. So I would set $1,000, and so let's say my bank account we're at 5,000. By the end of the month, it must have 4,000 in it. That's it. That's the way I did my budgeting back then. I was so stressed with other school stuff that I, quite frankly, didn't want to have to worry about that. So I ended up spending about like $800 to $1,000 a month just on life, right? Low key, I didn't make the best purchasing decisions. I had Amazon Prime, so I did buy a bunch of useless gadgets and cool tech that I didn't necessarily need. Like I would buy like circuit stuff, and I would buy cool little electronic gadgets and little stuff like that I can tinker with, right? To sort of feed my curiosity, for lack of a better term. But to manage finances, I would go with the sort of mass budget approach of here's 1,000 for the month and just give her, because you don't have many different categories of expenses after tuition. It's just rent and food, right? Like for me now, I pay for my internet, I pay for like my car, I pay for my car insurance, right? I pay for gas, I pay for life, I have life insurance through the company, I pay I pay through all this, all over the place, right? But in school, there's only like 3 or 4 really, like you're not paying for like car insurance when you're in school, unless you have a car. But yeah, that's my approach to budgeting, my advice.
Okay, sounds good. There's another question. It says, what's it like, the hierarchy for engineers? I'm a little unsure on that.
The hierarchy, as in like the admissions hierarchy, or how we recognize each other within the faculty?
I'm not sure. Maybe try rephrasing the question. Yeah, it just says hierarchy.
Okay, so I can try to speak for that though.
Okay.
I first of all, in no disrespect to the question, I don't like that word hierarchy, because that implies some are better than others, right? I know many software engineers who, like, people that did SE, software engineering at Waterloo, which is supposedly better than computer engineering, right? I know people that did software engineering that make a lot less than I do. And I know people that did civil that make similar to what software engineers make, right? Like on what criteria are you really evaluating these programs, right? What makes one program better than the other, right? Like electrical engineers have a fully different set of skills than a computer engineer, right? Like if you look at a computer engineer's co-op, they're usually doing some software development, right? They could have some QA, they could have some embedded experience, right? And they could even have straight up just a bunch of software experience, right? And if you look at a software engineer, they could also have the same thing, right? Like what it doesn't matter. I wouldn't classify one more than the other. What makes civil engineer worse than computer engineering? Is it the earning potential? Well, you can consider earnings potential, and then you can consider job satisfaction, right? Like I know people that would take a job that pays a lot less if it means they get rewarded in other factors, such as, I don't know, pre-IPO shares, right? Or like you can even just say purpose, right? Like people actually want a job that gives them purpose, or people want a job that actually, gives them a reason to wake up to in the morning, right? So unfortunately, I can't just say like one is better than the other, right? There are many dimensions on which you can evaluate all these different engineering programs, but at the end of the day, like do what you want, right? Not what people tell you to, not what a tier list. You're honestly going to live your life by a tier list? No, you don't do that, right? You live your life by what you want to do, not by a tier list. That's my response to that, basically. So I don't mean I don't mean to be offensive or to be combatant in my response, but that's simply my opinion for how you can like compare engineering hierarchy. You can put them into a hierarchy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have a couple more questions. So what was your time management strategy in high school?
My time management strategy in high school was awful. It was terrible from grades 9 to 11. It was terrible. Like I didn't have a schedule. I would given assignments late. I would like literally forget about assignments. It was awful. But in grade 12, I held myself more accountable. I learned, I literally just used a calendar to mark down all my due dates. That's it. And overnight, using a calendar improves like the way that my brain works and improves the way that I can self-organize. And I still use a calendar to this day. It doesn't need to be some fancy method of studying, right? Although I can talk about the Pomodoro. Okay, remind me to talk about the Pomodoro method. Just literally use a calendar, right? I used a calendar to regulate my study time and to regulate, the courses and to also determine like which time I should use to study for what, which time I should use to like prepare for which test, right? To learn about which content, right? Literally, yeah, I was awful in grade 9 to 11 for like self-regulation. I would play way too much League of Legends. I would play way too much CSGO. I still did in grade 12. I still played a decent amount, but at the same time, I recognized the importance of having a calendar, and I saw an immediate benefit to using a calendar and then holding myself accountable to the calendar. I can talk about study method too. There's this interesting method called the Pomodoro Technique, Pomodoro. It is Italian for some dish or something. But anyway, it's like a tomato timer. 25 minutes of studying, 5 minutes break. 25 minutes of studying, 5 minutes break. 25 on, 5 minutes off. 25 on, 5 off. That is the most sustainable way to retain information. And it has been proven by me, basically. That's what I did in grade 12. I would basically do like 4 Pomodoros, right? So I would do 4 sessions of 30 minutes studying of 25-minute on, 5-minute break. I would do 4 of those in a 2-hour session, and I would do 2 of those a day, basically. And then in university, I would do 3 of those a day. So being able to like organize my life into little boxes and then schedule those boxes around actually is very beneficial. So my advice, use a calendar and time block your events and consider using the Pomodoro technique. So 25 on, 5 off, 25 on, 5 off, and then block like 2 hours and then do that for those 2 hours.
Yep, sounds good. And we have another question, more specifically to coding and programming. Mm-hmm. So yes, when should you use Python and when should you use JavaScript or other coding languages?
Okay, so you should use a program based on the needs of the thing you're developing, right? So to answer your question more directly, though, that was the high level, right? So as an example, let's take scripting, for example. Any type of scripting on your computer where you need to like move files around, anytime you need to like, um, send a system alert, anytime you need to shut down, bring up your computer, transfer files, rename things, create files, anything involving that, you would use like bash. You would write a bash script, right? Anytime you need to write simple mathematical scripts that you want to be, able to run right away, you would use like MATLAB. Anytime you need to run computational scripts, you would use Python, right? That's why Python is very good because it's written almost like English. So when you write something in Python, you can actually very quickly infer from what's written there how you can explain it in English, basically. So that's why I like Python in interviews, because I see what they're writing and it looks like pseudocode, right? And then I know very quickly what it does. Whereas if I take a language like Java, a lot more confusing. If you want to go to the Java side of things, though, Java applications are very heavy, right? Whereas Python apps are very light. Python, you can just fire up your text editor, save it as a .py file, and then just run it on your MacBook, right? Java, you need all this runtime environment. You need to compile it into a jar. It has compile time checking, compile time type checking, and all this magical mumbo jumbo, right? That helps you write enterprise applications in a very large scale, but not very beneficial for like firing up a quick script to test something. When I'm tutoring my students, I literally will fire up the terminal. I will launch the terminal and just like make a quick example, 3 lines of Python code, right? Here's a list. And then here's how I can index a value in a list, right? I can do that in like 5 seconds right now. Whereas if I were to do that with like Java, I would have to then fire up Eclipse, which takes 4.5 years to open. And then after that, you'd have to like, okay. And then you got to open up, make your classes, and then all this stuff. And then, it doesn't compile, right? Yeah. So tailor the language you use to the application. And generally, as you go through your co-ops, you'll pick up more languages, right? Like I know a bunch. I know like Python, Java, C, C++, JavaScript, right? It just keeps going. Go is a great one, right? SQL, it just keeps going and going and going, right? And as you go along this path, you'll learn that like some languages are used for things that other languages aren't. You'll never see an enterprise application with like, hundreds of different endpoints written in bash with a bash script, right? Whereas you will see like system scripts written in bash, for example, right? So as you go along, you'll learn which languages are used for what application generally, or which languages will benefit which applications.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And another question. So what is the most important thing in high school? Does a good university matter? I think this might have been phrased incorrectly. So maybe they're asking, I'm just going to take a guess. Maybe they're asking what's the most important thing in university, and does a good high school matter?
No, everything is irrelevant once you hit university. It is the great equalizer when it comes to like humbling yourself. Like I know students that were so arrogant. Oh my God, I got into everyone wears the sweater. I got into Waterloo engineering. Everyone was super arrogant and super cocky and confident, right? And then they write their first midterm and they get like 20% on their midterm and they just get devastated, right? Like I've literally seen that happen. Like, doesn't matter what high school you went to once you get into Waterloo. It does not matter, right? What matters is what you picked up in high school. What matters are the good practices that you learned in high school. What matters is the math skills, the foundational skills, even the basic programming skills, the communication skills, the English skills that you pick up in high school. Okay. But once you go there, no one's going to like shun you for having gone to like AY Jackson rather than Bayview. No one's going to do that. Right. No one even cares at that point. You got into Waterloo, you got in, you have way bigger problems to deal with than what high school you went to, honestly. And even if you did like do full AP stuff, that doesn't matter a single bit when it comes to passing your stuff. Like I know people that did AP courses, right? They did AP math. Actually, having done AP math, they came out a lot cockier. They came out a lot more confident. And because of that, they didn't study. Oh, I know this stuff. This is high school review already. I did this in AP. I took AP, but you didn't, right? You get that a lot. And then they didn't study. And then what? They had to drop down a year. They failed the term. They failed the year, right? Like you're checked at the door pretty quickly. Your ego is checked at the door pretty quickly. And it's a very humbling experience to see that like people that thought they were hot shit going into Waterloo get humbled very quickly. And yeah, it's an interesting experience to say nonetheless.
Mhm. And another question. So did going to Waterloo help you find a job at Silicon Valley?
Yes, 100%, 100,000%, honestly. Um, in my company, I'd say like 5 to 10% of our engineers are Waterloo grads. And there's a few U of T trickling down there, and there's a few McMasters around there too, right? But the majority is Waterloo, and that's because companies in the Valley hire Waterloo. They hire Waterloo co-ops, right? They like the short format of 4 months on and then 4 months off, right? For us, we work for 4 months and then we go back to school for 4 months, and then we work for 4 months and then we go back to school for 4 months, right? If you go to U of T, they don't do that. They do what's called a PEY, professional experience year, or professional. Yeah, I think it's basically you do a whole year, right? And American companies don't really like to do that. They like to do short term. So, like for example, Google won't hire you for a year and a half, or I don't know. Facebook won't hire you for a year and a half, but they will hire you for the summer, for the 4 months in the summer, right? So for U of T students, it may not be worth it to apply to Google, or sorry, to apply to Facebook if it means they can only work for 4 months, right? A lot of people actually go to U of T and then break their PEY into 4 different co-ops, which I found interesting. Like I know somebody that worked at Thomson Reuters and then Amazon and then Shopify, right? They hop jobs every 4 months and then called themselves a co-op, even though it's actually one very, very long co-op term. So that's an interesting strategy that I found. That's outside the box. Yeah, that's basically what I have to say. Yeah, it's a very big advantage going to Waterloo, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get into Waterloo, right? Don't make it your sole purpose to get into Waterloo, because if you do, a lot of you guys will be disappointed, right? A lot of your parents, if your parents make it your goal to get into Waterloo and to like have this model career thing, like that's, in my opinion, not the right approach, right? Like if you like, that's basically you are living through your kid at this point, right? If your kid works their ass off, if they work so hard, right? They want to get into Waterloo, but they don't make it, right? Like, yeah, please don't love them any less, right? If they get into U of T instead of Waterloo and the kid is devastated, right? That means something's wrong. You got into U of T, dude. Like you're probably one of the, that's like still a top, that's like, top 20, top 30 school in the world or something like that, right? You still got into U of T, right? Like
17.
What's that?
17.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, rank 17. Yeah. Like, I don't know why people think that it's such a big deal. Besides the whole like clout thing, right? The clout of saying I got into Waterloo, right? I think it's a little overblown. You can, like, if you work your ass off at Mac, if you work your ass off at U of T, you'll still end up in the Valley. You'll still end up in New York. You'll still get a good job that pays way more than all of your friends combined. You'll still be just fine, right? So it's not the end of the world if you don't make it into Waterloo, and don't make it your purpose to get into Waterloo, right? You apply to Waterloo, you do your best, right? And you hope for the best. And if you don't make it, you say, well, I tried, but I have other options, right? That's what you should really do. Now, if you're fully out of options, that's a different story, right? But generally, I know a lot of you guys are smart enough to apply to more than just like 3 schools, right? You'll apply to like maybe 5 or 6. You'll have a backup. And if you keep that ethic up, if you just keep your head down and you keep working at it, like literally we'll end up just fine, right? Especially if you're in tech. Like tech is probably the hottest field right now. Anywhere you go, probably in the world, right? Literally, like there's no way, there's no counter to that, really, right? What pays the highest salaries? It's like what pays the highest salaries with a bachelor degree? It'll always be tech, right? At least now. Maybe that changes in 20 years, but at least now with a bachelor's degree, right? I know nobody that's in any other field that makes remotely anywhere near what my tech friends are making, right? So if you want to go to Waterloo for engineering and you as a parent are gunning for your kid to get into Waterloo engineering, like that's awesome, right? If they make it, that's great. If they go to Waterloo and they slack off, it doesn't matter, right? So that's all I have to say for that, basically. Yeah. I think I've got my message across.
Yeah, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you wait, let me see. Can you transfer from one program into another to transfer from one program into a software engineering or like into an engineering program?
Yeah, of course. So, okay. That's a very interesting question with a lot of nuances, actually. So when I applied, I got into electrical engineering because I knew that the applicant pool was the same, and I knew that I could transfer from electrical to computer pretty easily. Right. I'm taking the first year and a half, the first like 1A, 1B, and then Yeah, 2A are identical between electrical and computer engineering, I think. Yeah, when I did it, it was the same. So I was actually allowed to transfer for free. Now that avenue has closed. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think that they made the change earlier, so you actually have to commit to changing from computer to electrical a lot earlier. If you want to switch to a different, if you actually want to switch to like software engineering from computer engineering, you need to be like top like 5 in the class. I know many people that applied for that transfer. I don't know one person that got that transfer, and they had a 95 average in Waterloo, right? This guy, this kid literally had like a perfect average in high school and then like a 95 at Waterloo, right? And that's very hard to do. He was literally top 2 in the class, right? This guy. And he was granted the transfer to software engineering. But most of you guys won't get it. I can't get it. No way I can get it, right? So don't bank on getting into a program and then transferring around. If you do want to transfer, though, you will lose a year. If you want to transfer to anything that's like, let's say I want to go from mechatronics engineering to computer engineering, right? Even though they may seem the same, oh, you're building robots, you're building computers, right? They're actually quite different in their courses. You'll actually end up having to retake your first year. You'll start from the beginning. So that is a very, very heavy decision that you'll have to make. And if you want to make that decision, you commit to the decision. You don't go back on it. Okay. So it is possible to transfer between engineering programs, right? They are open to that. However, based on the availability and based on the demand for the program, right? For example, everyone wants to switch into software engineering, right? Based on the demand, they can only accept a certain amount of people, right? And so then they start grading people on their criteria, grading people not based on their high school marks, obviously, but based on their performance at Waterloo so far. So yeah, it's possible, but you want to get into the program that you want to finish. That's my advice.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds really complicated, to be honest.
It is. It's a super headache. And I know the people that did it because like they were like really committed to it. They knew what they wanted to do and they just went for it, right? But if you just, let's try it out, let's see how it goes. Don't do that. Not worth it. Because you lose a year of your school. Then you graduate a year later, right? And then you lose all your friends because your friends are in this year. And then now you're in the next year, right? So yeah, that's a heavy decision you'll have to make.
Yeah. Okay. So one last question. So I think this one, many people are also interested as well. Can you talk a little bit more about your career path?
Like future or present or past?
I think all, to be honest, like how you went from like high school to Waterloo to like Silicon Valley. Yeah. That entire process.
Okay. So it's, when I was in second year, I didn't want to go to the Valley. I just wanted to survive. Honestly, I was so focused on my school and like finding a job that like that wasn't really on my radar. Right. But as I got used to that rhythm, right, I know that we're sort of naturally rhythmic people, right? Humans are naturally rhythmic. And so once you get into that rhythm of like study, school, and then in your school, you get into those sub rhythms of like, okay, I'm going to study, sleep, eat, study, sleep, eat. Once you get into those rhythms, right, you actually start to like when you build that discipline. I have an interesting saying that goes discipline equals freedom, because when you're in that rigid discipline, you can now save that mental capacity for something else. Right. And when you're in that sort of rigid discipline of like, self-managing your time, right? When you're in that time, like you can then figure out what you want to do. And I figured out that I wanted to experience a different country. I wanted to find a co-op in a different country. So I applied to a company in Norway and a bunch of companies in California. Right. And it just so happened that I managed to match with an interview and then eventually get an offer from the company that I'm with today. Right. But like it comes from like being able to, I guess, like this is a little off topic, but being able to cement yourself into that rhythm, into that discipline means you can think about other things, right? Discipline equals freedom. But anyway, that's an aside. Back to the main topic here. If you don't reinvent yourself every 3 years, you become irrelevant in the industry. That's the piece of advice that I heard from one of my CTOs, basically. This guy literally every 3 years, his resume would be unrecognizable from the resume he made 3 years ago. He reinvents himself every 3 years because that's how quickly tech moves. Honestly, right now, I'm a software engineer, software developer, and I specialize in backend and infrastructure. In 3 years' time, someone could invent some magical AI that writes all the backend for me. And then all of a sudden I gotta reinvent myself. Now I'm an AI engineer. Who knows? Right? You got to reinvent yourself like every 3 years, honestly, to stay relevant. And that's what I plan to do. Like I'm reading up about this blockchain stuff, and I don't know, maybe I can use it, maybe I can't, but now it's in my bank, right? And so when I go back to that rhythm of like work, sleep, video games, work, sleep, video games. Now I can actually, free up that mental space and do a little more research on this crypto, and maybe I can build something cool with crypto. Who knows, right? So to summarize, I got to reinvent myself every 3 years, right? When I was in first and second year, which was about 3 years ago, I wanted to be an enterprise Java developer, right? I wanted to build applications in this one specific language that is used by many billion people. And I wanted to use this basically to build very, very large and bloated enterprise applications for big companies, because I saw that as job security, right? I knew that if I work for a huge company that has an app that's basically unmaintainable, if I work for that company and become an efficient contributor to that code base, then I cannot be fired, right? But now I've transitioned over to, well, I just abandoned Java completely. Now I write Golang, and I'm learning about how I can optimize different data structures in Golang such that I can get like a different performance. I'm learning about how I can use like API routing, and I can build different, I guess I can add different libraries to my backend to make it scale better, or to make it log better, or to make it more available, right? And that happened in 3 years, right? Like the code that I wrote 3 years ago, I don't remember a single bit of that. And I predict in 3 years' time, the code that I write now, I won't remember any bit of that, because I need to reinvent and figure out what's coming next.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It really shows how fast the engineering world is moving. And
it's fast.
And yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was all the questions. We went, over time, but I think it was well worth it. We learned a lot of valuable information. Yeah. So
Great.
For the audience, thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Wait, we got some information here. Look at that. Contact us.
Okay, yeah. So here's the contact information. Before you go, take a screenshot of this, or just write it down. Well worth connecting with the people.
Right. Well, thank you for asking me some very insightful questions, and I want to shout out to PWA, to those who are organizing this, and also to the audience for showing up and for listening to me ramble on about my experiences for an hour and a half. I don't usually get an audience to listen to me for this long, so I appreciate that. That's basically all I have to say. I'll stick around a little more if you guys want to ask me more questions. Maybe I don't know if I can see the chat. Can I see? Oh, there we go. So if you guys want to ask me like more questions, you can PM me, or you can send your email to like Victor to Vigwo at Python with AI.com, or you can forward it to Ryan. Or you can email it directly to me at, I think it's Andrew at pythonwithai.com. You can email it right to me, and I'll answer your questions privately as well. Besides that, though, I'll stick around for a bit until everybody heads out. But thanks for your time, guys. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you all for coming.
Alrighty. Yeah. So I'll stick around. I'm gonna get some water. Oh, perfect. You got some water. Beautiful.
Okay. There's another question is regarding the recording of this seminar. So there is a recording, and it can be accessed. I think you have to get in touch with the with the phone, the email, and they'll be happy to show you.
Of course.
In the WeChat.
Ingrid Zhang asks me, any requirement for doing coding? There is no requirement for doing coding. You should pick up coding on your own. If you have nothing on your belt, put something on your belt, right? There are a lot of tutorials, and even our course. There are a lot of tutorials online, and even our course that can help you out get started, right? And what I encourage you to do is not look at the requirements for doing coding, but instead look at a project that you want to do. Even something as simple as a calculator, a text-based calculator where you just input two numbers and it like spits out the sum, right? Or the product, whatever, anything, just like that's the requirement. Honestly, the requirement is like figuring out what you want to do. There's no actual like requirement. Oh, you must be in grade 9 and you must collect 3 infinity stones. And only once you collect the stones can you snap the wrist, and then you can write code. And it's not like that. No, it's a pickup. It's a pickup skill, basically. What's the ideal food for survival in university? Spaghetti. Spaghetti is like amazing. I love spaghetti. I ate way too much spaghetti. I said that I ate spaghetti for every in first year. I actually ate spaghetti for 4 years. I would have it like 5 days a week. And again, discipline equals freedom. I would eat the same thing every day. And because of that, I could free up my mental space. Ingrid saying, do we need to be good in math? Ingrid, I hope you realize that I'm terrible at math. No, you don't. Like, what the only math you really need is arithmetic. Honestly, you don't need to be able to solve derivatives. None of that stuff. No, you need it to get into a good school, but you don't need to be good at math to be a decent programmer. No. However, logic, I agree. Yes, you need to be very, very good at figuring out how to logic your way through a problem. That I agree with you. Logic is a very difficult thing to quantify and a very difficult thing to explain. Because you can like say, oh, like this is binary logic, right? You can say, oh, 1 and 0, and if this or that, then that, right? That's binary logic. But you can also get into like logic for which technology to pick or which language to do or how to write this line of code, right? So like logic, honestly, is probably the most important skill, right? Like being able to take an idea and then derive it and then break it and then logically segment it, right, into little manageable bits. And then on top of that, actually apply logic in your code. So like Boolean logic, binary logic, stuff like that. Yeah, but no, you don't need to be good in math to be a good coder. Like, honestly, listen, the best coder I know literally failed math. He failed math in university. That's fun. He had to retake the course. He took it again. He got a 100 in programming twice. He got 100 in data structures. He got 100 in our C++ course. And then he failed math. And now he works in California. That's to show you. But yeah, he's also very good at logic, though. He can logic his way through anybody. He's the best arguer I've ever. I'm so frustrated because like he argues so well. And he always justifies everything he says. And it's amazing. I respect that from him. But yeah, hope that answers your question there, Ingrid. And I said, I answered Alan's question already. What is the ideal food? Shawarma. I love shawarma. Shawarma is very good. Yeah. But besides that, consider spaghetti. I hope is that the end of the questions or is there more?
Yeah, I don't have anything on my end either.
Yeah, me neither. I think we're golden here.